This child will truly fall ill if things continue this way. Take her to get married. These were the words the Russian father said to the Singaporean man. Why did a father, who once firmly opposed his daughter marrying far away, suddenly change his mind? Mila's life completely changed after she spilled a cup of coffee while working at a cafe in Street Petersburg. That quiet Singaporean man, Yuze, who came to her rescue, overturned all of Mila's perceptions of masculinity. From resistance to affection, from falling in love to separation, from intense longing to her father's reluctant consent, a cup of coffee ignited a cross-country romance. Now, let us listen to Mila's story. Hello everyone, I am Mila. Born and raised in Street Petersburg, I have always deeply loved this city. From a young age, my standards for men were very clear. They had to be tall, strong, have a booming voice, and be full of confidence. This was the culture of our family. My father, Vladimir, a retired military man who later became a successful businessman, often taught my two older brothers to be tough. Men should be powerful, was my father's catchphrase. My eldest brother, Nikolai, is over 190 centimeters tall, and my second brother, Kirill, was even the wrestling team captain. When my friends talked about their relationships, they always asked the same questions. How tall is he? Is his voice strong enough? Does he have a masculine presence? These standards were deeply ingrained in my heart. During university, I majored in linguistics. To earn a living, I started working at a small cafe called Larissa, located in a quiet alley near my home. Although the storefront was old, it had a warm atmosphere. Most of the regulars were university students from the vicinity, and some simply came to read. One afternoon, about 3 months after I started working there, the cafe was as quiet as usual. I was wiping the tables by the window when the door suddenly opened, and someone walked in. At first glance, I thought he was an Asian tourist. He wasn't very tall, but he exuded a calm demeanor. Yuze quietly sat in a corner, opening the book he carried with him. There was nothing particularly special about that first meeting. But strangely, Yuze came every day, always at the same time, sitting in the same spot. Initially, he was just a passing customer, but gradually, I began to notice Yuze's presence. He was simply so different from Russian men. He never spoke loudly and was always very polite, saying, "A coffee, please," in such a gentle tone that it felt unfamiliar to me. One day, about 3 weeks later, I went to take Yuze's order. It was the first time I truly looked into Yuze's eyes. They were deep and calm. For a moment, my heart skipped a beat. Yuze looked up from his book and smiled at me. I felt my cheeks flush. "Today, I'd like a latte, please." Yuze's Russian wasn't very fluent, but the sound of his pronunciation was endearing. For the first time, I proactively asked Yuze a question. "Will you be staying in Russia for a long time?" "I'm here to study at a language center, planning to stay for about 5 months. I'm from Singapore." At that time, for me, Singapore was just some place in Asia. From that day on, I unconsciously started caring about Yuze. Whenever it was almost time for him to arrive at the cafe, I would inexplicably get nervous, even checking myself in the mirror and adjusting my hair. This version of myself felt strange. One day, I gathered my courage and walked over to Yuze's table. As I placed his coffee down, I casually asked, "What book are you reading?" Yuze held up the book for me to see. It was a Russian literary work, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. "You like Russian literature?" "Yes, I've loved it even before coming to Russia. I particularly like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy." At that moment, I became even more interested in Yuze. His earnest study of my country's culture was captivating. After that, we would occasionally chat. I learned that Yuze was a graduate student from Singapore City. A week later, the cafe was unusually busy. During lunchtime, the place was packed with customers. I was frantically taking orders and delivering drinks. Yuze, as usual, was sitting in his spot, reading. That's when the accident happened. A large, burly Russian male customer loudly placed an order. Normally, this type of man might have been to my liking, but that day, his booming voice irritated me. After taking his order, I had 3 cups of coffee on my tray. As I passed by Yuze's seat, our eyes met. In that brief moment of eye contact, I panicked. I lost my balance, the tray tilted, and the scalding coffee spilled all over the Russian customer's pants. The man abruptly stood up and roared, "What the hell? Such a clumsy woman is truly rare. My pants are ruined!" I froze on the spot, and all the customers' attention focused on us. The manager quickly rushed over to handle the situation, but the man kept shouting and demanding compensation. I was on the verge of tears. "It was just an accident. but his reaction was utterly excessive. My body began to tremble. Just then, Yuze, who had been quietly reading, stood up. Yuze slowly walked towards us. Although he was shorter than the Russian man, Yuze's gaze was incredibly firm. Yuze calmly said in Russian, "Accidents happen to everyone, but shouting like this is inappropriate." The Russian man glared down at Yuze. "Who are you to interfere, you short Asian man?" Yuze smiled, but it was not a warm smile at all. Yuze slowly pointed to the corner of the ceiling, where a surveillance camera was installed. "Everything is being recorded. This is a tourist area, and the police are nearby. Do you still wish to continue this way?" Yuze's voice wasn't loud at all. On the contrary, it was very quiet, yet his words carried immense weight. The Russian man froze for a moment, then cursed a few times before leaving the cafe. Only then did Yuze turn to me. "Are you okay?" At that moment, I was enveloped by a strange emotion. It was completely different from the strong, masculine men I usually admired, but Yuze's composure and wisdom suddenly became incredibly attractive. He hadn't raised his voice even once, yet he had perfectly controlled the entire situation. This Yuze made my heart pound. Thank you," I managed to reply. The manager kept thanking Yuze, and his drink was on the house that day. Yuze returned to his seat and continued reading as if nothing had happened. But for me, something definitely had. From that day on, I looked at Yuze with completely different eyes. He solved problems not with muscle, but with wisdom. Not with shouting, but with calmness. This image was incredibly handsome in my eyes. My previous standards for masculinity began to waver. On my way home after work, that scene kept replaying in my mind. My father, my brothers, or any of the men I had dated would undoubtedly have resorted to physical force in such a situation. For them, strength was the solution. But Yuze was different. Yuze handled the problem with wisdom and composure, and that demeanor touched something deep within me. The day after the coffee incident, the cafe door opened, and Yuze walked in. I unconsciously smiled. Yuze also looked at me and smiled. Different from usual, Yuze walked directly to the counter. "Were you scared yesterday?" Yuze's warm gaze made my heart race. No one in my family had ever looked at me with such eyes. I always heard things like, "Be strong" or "Don't make mistakes." But Yuze first considered my feelings. This thoughtfulness felt very special to me. Yuze ordered an Americano. As he took his coffee, I once again expressed my gratitude for yesterday. Yuze hesitated for a moment, then asked if I would like to take a walk along the Neva River after work. Suddenly, my heart pounded. I agreed without hesitation. We arranged to meet at 6 p.m. in front of the cafe. The closer it got to closing time, the more nervous I became. I rushed to the restroom to fix my hair and reapply lipstick. At exactly 6 o'clock, Yuze appeared at the cafe entrance. The spring evening air was crisp and refreshing. We slowly strolled along the Neva River, sharing our stories. Yuze was a graduate student from Singapore City, majoring in Russian literature. He had come here for 5 months of language study to write his thesis on Dostoevsky, and he would be staying in Petersburg for about 4 more months. Hearing this, I felt an inexplicable sense of relief. Listening to Yuze's story, I became curious about Singapore. According to Yuze's description, though Singapore was small, it was vibrant, where tradition and modernity coexisted, possessing a different kind of beauty compared to the vastness of Russia. Yuze's eyes sparkled with pride when he spoke about his country, and this pride became one of his charms. We talked late into the night, discussing everything from cultural differences to our dreams. Before I knew it, Yuze walked me home. Before we parted ways, Yuze carefully took my hand. It was warm, not rough or strong, but that touch gave me a strange sense of calm. After our first date, our meetings naturally continued. Every time Yuze came to the cafe, we would have a brief chat. He often waited for me at the door after my shift. Other customers started smiling when they saw us, especially Yekaterina, the manager, who frequently winked at me and said, "You two are a good match." I took Yuze to C Street, Petersburg's beautiful sights, secret paths along the Neva River, small parks known only to locals, and viewpoints overlooking the city. Yuze observed his surroundings with curiosity at every place, and he was always writing something in a small notebook. "What are you always writing?" I asked one day, curious. Yuze smiled shyly and replied, "This is my way of seeing your city. I hope to write a book with these observations someday." That sentence warmed my heart. Yuze cherished my hometown, my culture, so much. My friends or former boyfriends always took Street Petersburg for granted, but Yuze was different. Through Yuza's perspective, I began to see a beauty in this city I had never noticed before. We gradually spent more time together. On weekends, we would bring packed lunches for picnics in the park. I would also cook Russian dishes for Yuze. After eating my borscht, Yuze's eyes widened. "That's really delicious." His genuine reaction was so adorable. One day, Yuze came to the cafe with a somewhat somber expression. I asked what was wrong. Yuze sighed and said that he only had 1 month left of his language studies. That sentence made my heart sink. Although I knew Yuze would eventually leave, the reality of that moment only truly hit me then. That evening, we were quieter than usual, walking hand in hand along the Neva River, each lost in our own thoughts. "Tell me more about Singapore." I broke the silence. Yuze's expression brightened, and he began to talk about his country. He described Singapore City's efficient MRT system, though it was always bustling, picnics in its many parks, and the diverse culinary scene. Yuze's descriptions were very vivid. What particularly impressed me was Singapore's culture of striving for efficiency, where everything rapidly changed and developed. This story fascinated me. From that day on, I began to want to understand Singapore better. I borrowed books about Singapore from the library, and even found a few Singaporean dramas online to watch. At first, it was just to understand Yuze better, but gradually, I became interested in the country itself. Its organized yet passionate culture deeply attracted me. The next day, I started learning a little Mandarin, beginning with simple greetings. Yuze taught me, "Ni hao," hello, "xie xie," thank you, and "wo ai ni," I love you. When we got to the last phrase, both of our faces flushed, but through our eyes, we both understood each other's feelings. A week before his departure, we enjoyed Street Petersburg's white nights. Even late into the night, the sky never completely darkened. It was a special time. At 2 in the morning, a faint glow still lingered in the sky. We walked along the Neva River, where many people gathered to watch the bridges being raised. "Mila," Yuze suddenly called my name in a serious voice. I have to go back to Singapore. Although I had known it all along, hearing it directly still hurt deeply. I nodded, unable to speak. "But I don't want to be separated from you," Yuze continued. "Can we keep in touch? If, someday, you could come to Singapore." Before Yuze could finish, I blurted out, "Can I go with you?" After saying it, I was surprised myself. But at that moment, I knew that was what I truly wanted. Yuze's eyes widened as he looked at me. "Really? You want to come to Singapore?" I replied with a firm voice. "Yes, it's true. I want to be with you. And I also want to get to know your country." Yuze hugged me tightly. His embrace was warm, but practical issues quickly surfaced in my mind. Visas, duration of stay, and most importantly, my parents' approval. The next day, we began to make practical plans. Yuze helped me find a place to stay in Singapore and also research schools where I could continue my language studies. I learned that I could initially stay for 3 months on a tourist visa, which could later be converted into a student visa. "I need to tell my parents," I said cautiously. Yuze squeezed my hand. "Shall I tell them with you?" Yuze's offer made me very grateful, but this was a problem I had to solve first. That evening, I took a deep breath and explained my plan to my parents. Their reaction was as I had expected. Very intense. "What? Singapore? Where is that?" My father, Vladimir, roared. "What will you do in that tiny country?" My mother, Galina, started crying. "How long have you even known this man? Are you crazy? To go alone to a place so far away?" I calmly explained my thoughts, the safety of Singapore, the educational opportunities, and my desire to experience a new culture. But my parents remained adamant, especially my father. My daughter abandoning her parents for a foreign man. My father was furious. The next few days, the atmosphere at home was frigid. I told Yuze about the situation. Yuze understood. "Don't rush, persuade them slowly." Yuze's calmness also rubbed off on me. With only 2 days left before Yuze's departure, I decided to make one last attempt. At dinner, I spoke up again. "Please, listen to me. I'm not just following a man. I want to explore my life's possibilities. Give me 1 year. If I can't adapt, I'll come back." My mother sighed. "Mila, I know how stubborn you are, but why must you go for a year?" Suddenly, my father spoke. "1 year then, and you must contact us every week. Promise me." I could hardly believe my father had agreed. Tears of joy streamed down my face. I promised my father, truly grateful. That night, I called Yuze. My parents agreed. Although there's a 1-year condition, I can go. Over the phone, Yuze's joyous laughter rang out. "Really? I'm so happy. We'll have a wonderful time in Singapore. I'll be waiting for you in Singapore. And so our plan took concrete shape. Yuze returned to Singapore first to make all the preparations, while I began processing my visa and organizing the necessary documents. The excitement I felt when I booked my flight to Singapore City is something I can still never forget. The day Yuze left, we shared a final embrace at the airport. "See you in a month," Yuze whispered. I nodded, holding back tears. This wasn't a goodbye, but a new beginning, I told myself. The month after Yuze left was incredibly busy. I sorted through my belongings, handled my work in Russia, and diligently studied basic Mandarin. Every evening, I video called Yuze, listening to more about life in Singapore City. Yuze had already found a small room for me and researched language schools. Finally, the departure date arrived. My parents still looked worried, but they seemed to have accepted it. My father silently helped me carry my luggage. During our final embrace at the airport, my father whispered in my ear, "If you're happy, that's enough. But don't forget, you always have a place to come back to." Those words brought tears to my eyes. I love you, Father, Mother. As I checked in, I looked out at the Russian sky. Although scared, I felt more anticipation. My heart was filled with excitement. The plane to Singapore City took off. I was flying towards a new life, towards Yuze, towards Singapore, towards a brand new me. My heart pounded as I arrived at Changi International Airport. Stepping off the plane, everything felt different. Announcements were first made in Mandarin, and Chinese characters on signs were everywhere. After passing through immigration, Yuze was waiting for me with a bright smile. The moment I saw Yuze, all my anxieties vanished. "You really came to Singapore." A new beginning was about to unfold, and my heart was full of anticipation. Yuze took my luggage. On the way from the airport to Singapore city center, the scenery outside the window captivated me. Unlike the vast, open spaces of Russia, Singapore was densely packed with high-rise buildings and apartments everywhere. Despite this, the roads were clean, and traffic flowed surprisingly orderly. The place Yuze found for me was a small studio apartment near a university district on the outskirts of Singapore City. Although the space was compact, all the amenities were complete. It was only half the size of my room in Russia, but miraculously, it had everything necessary. What was particularly novel was the compact, efficient design, maximizing every inch of space in a way that felt entirely new. Yuze proudly explained that this smart use of space was common in Singapore, making even small homes comfortable and well-ventilated despite the tropical climate. The first night, I couldn't sleep due to jet lag. Sounds of unfamiliar languages and cars drifted from outside, making me feel very much a stranger. But the fact that Yuze lived just next door brought me peace of mind. We agreed to have breakfast together every morning. The next day, my official life in Singapore City began. Yuze started by teaching me how to use the MRT card. The MRT was truly amazing. While Russia's metro was beautiful, Singapore's MRT surpassed it in terms of punctuality and cleanliness. I was startled when an announcement stated the exact minute and second of arrival, and even more astonishingly, the train actually arrived precisely on time. "Is it always this accurate?" I asked Yuze. He nodded matter-of-factly. Being late is a big deal here. A week later, I enrolled in a Mandarin language school, attending classes from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. daily. In the afternoons, I explored various parts of Singapore City, sometimes with Yuze, and sometimes with foreign friends I made at school. People from Russia, America, France, Vietnam, and other countries. Interacting with them also broadened my international experience. Singaporean food was initially difficult to adapt to. It was too spicy and heavily seasoned. Especially the chili crab. The first bite made me wonder how anyone could eat it. But magically, after a week, I felt something was missing from my meal without it. I tried various dishes like Hainanese chicken rice, laksa, and satay, and my palate gradually became accustomed to Singaporean flavors. After a month, I could speak simple sentences in basic Mandarin. While a bit slow when buying groceries or ordering at a cafe, I no longer needed Yuze's help. That small accomplishment made me very proud. Learning a new language, besides Russian and English, was like discovering a new world. My relationship with Yuze also deepened. We studied together at Yuze's university library, and on weekends, we visited Singaporean museums or cultural heritage sites. Yuze was always thoughtful, helping me understand Singaporean culture. Sometimes, when I made mistakes due to cultural differences, Yuze would smile and say, "It's okay, everyone's like that at first." What left a particularly deep impression on me was Singapore's hawker center culture, with stalls brightly lit until late at night, and 24-hour convenience stores. Most importantly, the streets were safe to walk on. In Russia, it could be dangerous for women to walk alone at night, but in Singapore City, even walking home alone at midnight, I felt no fear. "Why is Singapore so safe?" I asked Yuze one day. "There are many surveillance cameras and law enforcement is good. Of course, no place is entirely safe, but relatively speaking, it's considered safe." 3 months later, I had fully integrated into Singaporean life. I converted to a student visa, allowing me to study for a year. Every week, I video called my parents, and seeing me doing well seemed to reassure them. My mother, especially, expressed happiness, saying, "You look very well." Entering my 6th month, I started working part-time at a small cafe, wanting to improve my Mandarin skills. Talking with various customers every day greatly helped me learn conversational Mandarin. The cafe owner was kind and patiently listened to me speak in Mandarin. Having cafe experience in Russia, the work itself wasn't difficult. One day, Yuze came to see me with a serious expression. Yuze had completed his graduate program and was preparing to enter the workforce. He said he had a good opportunity and had applied to a company involved in international exchange. But that company was in Jurong. Jurong? Where's that? I was confused. Jurong is in the western part of Singapore, about an hour by MRT. At that moment, my heart sank. It meant we would have to live separately. But I wanted to support Yuze's dream. If it was a decision for our mutual growth, I should accept it. "It's okay. We can just meet on weekends," I said, trying to sound cheerful. And so, Yuze went to Jurong, and we became a weekend couple. Every Friday, Yuze would come up to Singapore City, or I would go down to Jurong. Jurong had a different charm compared to Singapore City. It was greener, people seemed more relaxed, and the food was slightly different. Experiencing this diversity was also interesting. Time flew by. I had been in Singapore for 11 months already. The promised year was almost up. Yuze and I seriously discussed what we should do next. I wanted to stay in Singapore, but I also had to keep my promise to my parents. "I think I have to go back to Russia," I said heavily. After all, a promise was a promise. Yuze thought for a moment, then replied, "I understand, but I hope our relationship can continue. A long-distance relationship is also possible." Yuze's words reassured me. We also cautiously talked about marriage, deciding to wait until after I returned to Russia and observed things for about 6 months. During that period, Yuze would also visit Russia. Finally, the agreed-upon year passed. I started packing my luggage, small souvenirs collected in Singapore, photos, and a wealth of memories. The night before I left, Yuze and I climbed Marina Bay Sands Sky Park to look out over the night view of Singapore City. Thinking of leaving this beautiful country, my heart ached. "I will definitely come back," I said, holding Yuze's hand tightly. The next day, Yuze saw me off at the airport. We shared a final embrace, holding back tears. Although it was a parting, I wanted to see it as another beginning. As I checked in, I looked out at Singapore's sky. This country was no longer unfamiliar. Instead, it had become a part of my heart. Arriving in Street Petersburg, my parents were waiting for me at the airport. Seeing the long-missed faces of my family, joy welled up in my heart. Back home, everything was unchanged. My room, my books, the familiar view outside my window. But something was different. That something was me. The first day, I was exhausted from jet lag, but my family and I enjoyed a pleasant time eating Russian food. My mother listened intently to my stories, very curious about Singapore. My father asked, "Is that country really that good?" I answered truthfully, "Yes, it really is." But a week later, strange emotions began to surface. Daily life in Russia suddenly felt inconvenient. Buses were always late, people were often loud, and the streets were messy and noisy. Having grown accustomed to Singapore's orderly and efficient systems, Russia's disarray became difficult to bear. Especially at night, walking alone became frightening again. The sense of safety I had taken for granted in Singapore became a luxury here. It was the same when meeting friends. Their booming voices and rough jokes now felt alien. Even the food suddenly seemed too oily and salty. I began to miss the spicy and sour taste of laksa. Every day, I video called Yuze. Only seeing Yuze's face brought me a moment of calm, but after the call ended, an even greater sense of loneliness washed over me. Gradually, I started getting headaches, couldn't sleep at night, and my concentration dropped. Studying or working became very difficult. "Mila, what's wrong? You don't look well." my mother asked worriedly one morning. It's nothing, just a bit tired. I brushed her off casually, but my condition didn't improve. Instead, I became more and more depressed, and my temper worsened. I constantly yearned for life in Singapore. The clean streets, the friendly people, the efficient systems, and most importantly, the place where Yuze was. My heart was already there. A month later, my parents began to seriously worry about my state. My father in particular jokingly asked if I had caught some disease in Singapore. It was then that I suddenly realized I really was sick. Sick from missing Singapore. Could this be the opposite of homesickness? One night, unable to bear the headache, I burst into tears. Hearing the sound, my father walked into my room. My father, who usually didn't express emotions much, sat beside me that day, patting my back. Tell me, Mila, what's really wrong? All my emotions erupted. Father, I miss Singapore so much. Life here suddenly feels so difficult. Everything is inconvenient and irritating. My father was silent for a while, then suddenly stood up and walked to the living room. After a moment, he returned with the phone. To my surprise, my father was dialing Yuze's number. I didn't know how my father knew the number. Perhaps he had seen it on my phone. Hello, is this Mr. Yuze? I am Mila's father. My father spoke in broken English. My heart almost stopped. I didn't know what my father would say and was terrified. But unexpectedly, the conversation was very mild. Yuze spoke respectfully to my father, occasionally using humor to lighten the mood. I even heard my father laugh. The call lasted about 20 minutes. My father handed me the phone, then said something surprising. This child will truly fall ill if things continue this way. Take her to get married. I couldn't believe my father had agreed to our marriage. Over the phone, Yuze's astonished voice came through. Really? Mila, your father actually said that? Yes, it's true. Tears of joy flowed. After the call ended, my father placed his hand on my shoulder. Your happiness is what matters most. If that man can make you happy, that's enough. That night, for the first time in a month, I slept soundly. In my dream, I was walking on the streets of Singapore City, for that dream was soon to come true. Less than a week after my father agreed to the marriage, Yuze flew to Russia. When Yuze appeared at the airport, it felt like a dream. He looked the same as when I saw him in Singapore City, but this time, he was wearing a suit and holding a bouquet of flowers. Seeing Yuze, I rushed to hug him. His embrace was still warm. On the way home, Yuze seemed very nervous. Meeting a Russian family for the first time was a big test for Yuze. I squeezed Yuze's hand and whispered, "Don't worry, Father already likes you." When we arrived home, my parents were waiting for us at the door. My father stood more sternly than usual, and my mother's eyes were teary. Yuze, using the Russian he had prepared, greeted them solemnly. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I am Yuze. I truly love Mila." Yuze's pronunciation of Russian was so endearing. My father looked at Yuze for a moment, then suddenly laughed and embraced Yuze tightly. "Come in. Mother has prepared a table full of traditional Russian dishes. Borscht and blini." The table was laden with food. Yuze bravely sampled every dish, particularly loving the borscht, having 2 extra bowls. Seeing this, my mother completely opened up. Throughout the evening, Yuze talked about his family, his life in Singapore, and our future plans. He spoke a mix of broken Russian and English, making every effort to communicate, which was very impressive. Especially when he talked about Russian literature, which my father loved. My father's eyes sparkled. "You know Dostoevsky better than a true Russian," my father exclaimed admiringly. That night, Yuze stayed at a nearby hotel. Before he left, my father took Yuze to his study for a private conversation. I don't know what they discussed, but later, Yuze said that my father asked him to make me happy. And astonishingly, my father brought out a family heirloom, a flask of vodka passed down from my grandfather, and they shared a drink, performing some kind of ritual. The next day, we discussed the wedding preparations in detail. We decided to hold the wedding in Singapore, followed by a small party in Russia. Yuze stayed in Petersburg for 3 days, and became very close to my family, even watching a football match and cheering with my brothers on the last day. After his brief stay in Russia, we returned to Singapore together. This time, my feelings when boarding the plane were completely different. Singapore was no longer a foreign country. It was where my future would unfold. Upon arriving in Singapore City, we immediately plunged into wedding preparations. I was very nervous when I first met Yuze's parents. I knew Singaporean family culture was different from Russian. Thankfully, Yuze's parents were very open and warm. Yuze's mother especially was touched to see me diligently learning Mandarin and offered to personally teach me Singaporean cooking. "Mila, our Yuze has really found a wonderful person," Yuze's mother said, making me almost cry. The wedding was held in a small chapel in Singapore City. Only my parents came from Russia, but many of Yuze's family and friends attended, making the atmosphere lively. It was a beautiful moment where two cultures met. We wore both traditional Russian attire and Singaporean traditional Peranakan kebayas. The party was a blend of food and music from both countries. The happiness I felt that day was inexpressible. For our honeymoon, we went to Sentosa Island. The blue sea and beautiful natural scenery completely captivated me. It was a different kind of beauty compared to Russia's vast steppes. Spending a week hiking and walking along the beach with Yuze, enjoying delicious food, felt like a dream. Our newlywed home was a small apartment in a Singapore City suburb. Although not large, we happily decorated our space, harmoniously blending Russian and Singaporean styles to create a unique and cozy home. Specifically, one side of the living room held a special section for Russian literature, while the other collected Singaporean books. After marriage, I began preparing to obtain Singaporean citizenship. It involved many stages, including language proficiency and cultural understanding tests. Yuze was always there to help. Thanks to Yuze, a year later, I obtained Singaporean citizenship. Possessing citizenship of two countries was an important step in completing my identity. Finding a job was a bit difficult. Initially, I worked as an instructor at a Russian language tuition center. Later, I leveraged my language skills to start working as a Russian Mandarin translator. Especially with increasing business activities between the two countries, the demand for bilingual talent like me grew. The busier I got with work, the more Singaporeans I met, and the more deeply I integrated into Singaporean society. In our second year of marriage, our first child was born, a son. We gave him a Singaporean name, Yu Cheng, and a Russian name, Daniel. Holding the child, I could see the blend of two cultures on his small face. He had Yuze's eyes and my nose. Becoming parents was another level of experience. When raising children, cultural differences became even more apparent. In Russia, children are generally raised with more freedom, but Singapore's passion for education is unique. Yuze and I adopted the best aspects of both cultures to create our own parenting style. When Yu Cheng was 2, my parents visited Singapore for the first time. "This place is really suitable for living," my father said after a week. "Now I understand why you wanted to live here." Our second child was born 3 years later, this time a daughter. We named her Sihan in Singaporean and Vera in Russian. Raising 2 children strengthened our family even more. On weekends, we would go to parks or visit museums with the children. Sometimes, we cooked Russian food together, teaching them about both cultures. As the children grew up, I hoped they would naturally use both languages. At home, Russian and Mandarin were used interchangeably. Miraculously, the children quickly learned to distinguish between the two languages and used them appropriately, depending on the situation. Russian, with their grandparents, and Mandarin, at kindergarten or school, switching freely. In our 5th year as a family, something astonishing happened. My parents decided to relocate to Singapore. My father had retired, and my mother was no longer working. Their desire to live closer to their grandchildren, along with Singapore's safe and convenient living environment, influenced my parents' decision. "The place you love so much, we want to experience living there too," my father said, bringing tears of joy to my eyes. My parents rented an apartment not far from our home. Initially, adapting was a bit difficult, but astonishingly, my parents quickly got used to Singaporean life. My father, in particular, made friends by playing chess with Singaporean elderly people in a nearby park, while my mother found new interests by taking Singaporean cooking classes. Yuze had now become a director at the International Exchange Company. Especially with the expansion of business related to Russia, Yuze's career grew alongside it. Besides my translation work, I also taught Russian as a lecturer at a university. Serving as a bridge between two cultures gave me a great sense of accomplishment. One day, there was a gathering of the Russian community living in Singapore. A young Russian woman I met there asked me, "How can you live in Singapore for so long? Wasn't adapting very difficult?" I thought about the question for a moment, then smiled and replied, "Well, the story is a bit long. It all started the day I spilled a cup of coffee. I began to narrate my story, starting from that small cafe in street, Petersburg, how the quiet Singaporean man completely changed my life, and how I found my true home in Singapore. "Are you happy now?" she finally asked. "Yes, truly very happy," I replied sincerely. "This is where I belong." On the way home, I suddenly thought of that cafe from 10 years ago. If I hadn't accidentally spilled coffee that day, if Yuza hadn't been there, if Yuza hadn't stepped in, life truly is unpredictable. Small moments gather to create our destiny. Now, our family had moved to a more spacious house in a Singapore city suburb. On the living room wall hung photos of street, Petersburg and Singapore City, symbolizing our home, where two cities, two cultures, two worlds, merged into one. Sometimes, I would tell the children the story of how Yuza and I met. Yu Cheng always said, "Papa is so handsome." Sihan would ask to visit that cafe when we next went to Russia. Each time, Yuza and I would exchange smiles. Life truly is a magical journey. I once thought strong, robust Russian men were ideal, but now I was living in Singapore, having built a family with a quiet, wise Singaporean man. Sometimes, life flows in directions we never anticipate, but that is the beauty of life. Now, I can confidently say that this is where I belong. Street Petersburg is the homeland where I was born and raised, but Singapore City is the home I chose. Both places are cherished in my heart, and between the two, I found true happiness. The children gradually grew older. Yu Cheng was now 8 and Sihan 5. Both children were healthy and lively, making many friends at school. On weekends, our whole family would go to Lau Pa Sat or East Coast Park for strolls along the waterfront and street food. Sometimes, we would also travel to Pulau Ubin. The scenery there reminded me of certain corners of street Petersburg, yet it had a completely different charm. My parents had now fully adapted to Singaporean life. My father even started learning Mandarin. Although his progress was slow, he was very diligent. My mother, on the other hand, became proficient in cooking Singaporean dishes, sometimes teaching me how to make Hainanese chicken, rice, or laksa. When the family gathered for meals, Russian and Singaporean dishes would appear simultaneously on the table. Borscht served alongside chili crab. This scene was our family's daily routine. Yuza's work became increasingly stable, and the company placed great trust in him, especially in handling all business related to Russia. My translation work also grew. Besides translating commercial documents, I started translating literary works. Translating Russian classical literature into Mandarin was a very meaningful task. One day, I saw my translated book in a bookstore. The emotion of that moment is something I can never forget. My name was written in Mandarin on the cover, Mila, translator. That symbolized that I had truly become a part of this society. Teaching Russian at the university was also very interesting. Students were curious about Russian culture and literature, and being able to share my experiences and knowledge made me feel very valuable. Some students even said that because of my classes, they wanted to study in Russia. Hearing these words filled me with pride. One day, Yu Cheng asked me a question. "Mama, do you like Singapore or Russia?" I thought for a moment, then replied, "I like both places. Russia is where Mama was born, and Singapore is the place Mama chose. Both are very important, just like you and your sister." Yu Cheng nodded, half understanding. Sihan tugged at my hand. "Then we're so lucky to have two countries." The children's words made my eyes well up. Yes, we are truly lucky to experience two cultures, speak two languages, and have two homes. What a precious gift this is. Last year, our whole family traveled back to Russia. It was the children's first time seeing Street Petersburg. Yu Cheng and Sihan gasped in amazement at the beautiful city. I took them to the Neva River embankment, the place where Yuza and I had our first date. "This is where Mama and Papa had their first date," I told them. The children excitedly looked around, imagining the scene. We also visited the Larissa Cafe. That small cafe was still in its original spot. The owner, Yekaterina, was surprised to see us. "Mila, is that really you?" We hugged tightly. Yekaterina had aged, but her smile was still warm. "This is my husband, Yuza, and these are our children." Yekaterina's eyes welled up. "I remember your story from back then. I never imagined it would have such an ending." We sat in that cafe for a long time, drinking coffee and reminiscing about the past. Yuze sat in his old corner spot, while the children ran around and played. In that moment, I deeply felt how truly miraculous life is. A single spilled cup of coffee changed my entire life. If I hadn't made that mistake that day, if Yuza hadn't been there, if Yuza hadn't stepped forward, none of this would exist now. On the plane back to Singapore, Yuze held my hand. "Do you ever regret it?" Yuze suddenly asked. "Leaving Russia to come to Singapore?" I looked into Yu's eyes and answered without hesitation. Not once. It was the best decision I ever made. Yuze smiled and kissed my forehead. The children were asleep beside us. I looked out at the clouds, thinking of this 10-year journey. From street, Petersburg to Singapore City. From unfamiliarity to familiarity. From fear to peace of mind. From loneliness to happiness. Every step was not easy, but every step was worth it. Now I understood that home is not just the place where you are born. Home is where the heart is. Home is where the people you love are. Home is where you feel safe and happy. For me, Singapore City was home. The plane landed at Changi Airport. The familiar announcement sounded. The children woke up, rubbing their eyes. "Are we home?" Sihan asked. "Yes, we're home," I replied with a smile. Stepping out of the airport and into a taxi, I looked out at the familiar streetscape, my heart filled with warmth. This was the feeling of coming home. Back at our house, opening the door, a familiar scent welcomed us. The children excitedly ran into their rooms. Yuza and I exchanged a smile. "Home is still the most comfortable," Yuza said. I nodded and began unpacking, taking out gifts we brought back from Russia. Chocolates for my parents, souvenirs for friends, and toys for the children. The next day, my parents came to our house. The children excitedly shared their travel stories with their grandparents. "Street Petersburg is so beautiful," Yu Cheng said. "And the bridges on the river open up," Sihan added. My father, Vladimir, smiled as he listened to the children. "Next time, we'll go together," my mother Galina said. "It's been too long since I've been back." Looking at this scene, my heart was filled with gratitude. To have my parents living nearby, and for the children to see their grandparents often. What a fortunate situation this was. On the weekend, Yu's parents also came over. Both sides of the family gathered. Although language was a bit of a barrier, they communicated with smiles and gestures, with the children acting as translators in between. This scene was full of warmth. At dinner, the table was laden with various dishes. Hainanese chicken rice, laksa, satay, and my mother's borscht, or pelmeni. The foods of two cultures perfectly blended, and everyone ate happily. After dinner, the adults chatted, while the children played nearby. I sat beside Yu's, watching it all, my heart overflowing with happiness. This was the life I wanted. A loving husband, adorable children, healthy parents, and a harmonious family. What could be more precious than these days? Days passed, and the children continued to grow. Yu Cheng started 3rd grade in primary school, and Sihan was in her last year of kindergarten. Both children adapted well to school life, making many friends. Their teachers all said they were special, speaking 2 languages and understanding 2 cultures, which made them more open and globally aware than other children. My translation work became increasingly busy. Recently, I took on a large project to translate an entire collection of Russian classical literature. This was a very challenging but also very meaningful task. It was my honor to bring Russian culture to Singaporean readers. Yu's career also flourished. Recently, his company opened a new department dedicated to the Asian market, and Yu's was appointed as its head. This was a testament to Yu's capabilities, and we were all very proud of him. One evening, after the children were asleep, Yuze and I sat on the balcony, gazing at the night view of Singapore City. The city lights twinkled, and in the distance, we could see Marina Bay Sands. "Remember the first time we came here?" Yuze asked. "Of course," I said. "You were so nervous back then." Yuze laughed. "Yes, I didn't understand anything, couldn't even ride the MRT." We both chuckled. "Now you're more like a Singaporean than I am," Yuze said. "Not at all," I retorted. "I'll always be Russian. I've just become Singaporean too." Yuze held my hand. "You know what? I'm so grateful for that coffee incident. If it weren't for that Russian man, if you hadn't spilled the coffee, we might not be here today." I leaned against Yuze's shoulder. Fate truly is wondrous. A small accident changed 2 people's lives. We quietly enjoyed the peaceful night. There was no need for many words. Each other's presence was the best companionship. After a while, Yuze suddenly said, "Mila, I love you." I looked up at Yuze. "I love you too, Yuze. Thank you for changing my life." Yuze smiled. "You changed my life." We looked at each other and smiled, then embraced tightly. On this warm night, in this city we shared, in this home we built, we felt complete happiness. Time continued to flow. In the blink of an eye, I had been in Singapore for 15 years. Yu Cheng was now 13, and Sihan 10. Both children had grown up. Yu Cheng was already a secondary school student, starting to have his own ideas about the future. One day, Yu Cheng told me, "Mama, I want to be a translator like you someday." Hearing this, I was deeply moved. "Why?" I asked. "Because I think it's cool to connect two worlds and help different people understand each other," Yu Cheng said earnestly. I hugged Yu Cheng. "Mama supports your dream." Sihan, on the other hand, wanted to be a teacher, saying she wanted to teach Mandarin to foreign children so they too could understand two cultures like her. Sihan said this innocently. Looking at my children, I felt immense pride. They had inherited Yu's and my values: openness, inclusivity, and respect for different cultures. This was the best gift we could give them. My parents were now in their 72nd and relatively healthy. Every morning, they went to the park to exercise. My father's chess skills improved greatly, often winning against his Singaporean chess friends. My mother, meanwhile, fell in love with Tai Chi, saying it was good for the body. Seeing my parents thriving so well in Singapore, I was comforted that our initial decision had been the right one. Yu's parents also often visited us. The elderly, from both sides of the family, had a very good relationship. Although language was a barrier, they communicated with their hearts. Sometimes, they would go out together, visiting gardens by the bay, watching the sunset at East Coast Park, or enjoying hawker center snacks. These simple joys were the most beautiful part of life. My career also saw new developments. Besides translation and teaching, I started writing books about my experiences in a cross-cultural marriage, my insights on living in a foreign country, and how to raise bicultural children. After publication, the response was very positive. Many people said they were inspired, and some felt a sense of shared experience. This gave me a great sense of accomplishment, realizing that my experiences could help others. Yu was now the company's vice president, responsible for operations across the entire Asian region. Although his work was busy, Yu always made an effort to spend time with his family. He always spent weekends with us, and no matter how tired he was, he would play with the children. This made me love Yu even more. One day, I received a letter from St. Petersburg University, inviting me back to give a lecture on cross-cultural communication. I was very surprised and honored. After discussing it with Yu, I decided to accept the invitation. This time, I brought the whole family with me. The children were excited to go to Russia again and cheered. Arriving in St. Petersburg, everything felt so familiar yet so strange. The city had changed a lot, but its essence remained the same. On the day of the lecture, the hall was packed with people, students, professors, and some old friends. I stood on the podium, looking at the audience, took a deep breath, and began to share my story. I started from that spilled cup of coffee, talked about meeting Yu, my decision to come to Singapore, the process of adaptation, the cultural shock, and finally, finding my sense of belonging. I spoke for over an hour, and everyone in the audience listened intently. After the lecture, applause erupted like thunder. Many people lined up to talk to me, asking various questions and sharing their stories. In that moment, I deeply felt that my experiences didn't just belong to me. They belonged to everyone who crossed cultural boundaries, everyone who bravely pursued happiness, everyone who was willing to embrace different worlds. At the dinner after the lecture, an old professor chatted with me. "Mila, you've done very well. You are our pride," an old professor said. My eyes welled up. "Thank you, Professor. It was here that you gave me the foundation, giving me the courage to explore the world." On the plane back to Singapore, I looked out the window, thinking about this journey, these 15 years, and the future. Yu was asleep beside me, and the children were also asleep. I looked at their faces, my heart filled with gratitude. Grateful for that spilled coffee. Grateful for Yu's courage. Grateful for my parents' support. Grateful for Singapore's acceptance. Grateful for all the encounters. The plane landed at Changi Airport. The familiar announcement sounded. The children woke up. "Are we home?" Sihan said. "Yes, we're home," I replied with a smile. Stepping out of the airport, Singapore's warm air greeted us. "We're home," Sihan said. "Yes, we're home," I replied with a smile. Yes, we were home. This was my home, not because it was where I was born, but because it held the people I loved, the life I chose, and the happiness I found. Life is like that. It's not where you come from, but where you choose to go. Not your origin, but your belonging. I chose Singapore City, and Singapore City chose me. We chose each other, accepted each other, and fulfilled each other. This is my story, from St. Petersburg to Singapore City, from unfamiliarity to familiarity, from loneliness to happiness. A miraculous journey that began with a cup of coffee, a choice I would never regret. A love that crossed thousands of miles, a family woven from two cultures. This is my life, my happiness, my home.